Jake Collins sat in the dimly lit cafeteria of the Endeavor, his fingers tapping nervously against the table. He had only been assigned to the ship for a month, but in that time he had quickly grown accustomed to the routine of long hours and the quiet hum of the spacecraft as it drifted through deep space. It was far from the action he had experienced in his earlier days as a fighter pilot, but now he was an engineer working on complex systems to ensure the ship stayed in one piece. But it wasn't the ship that had his attention today. It was something else entirely: Ivy Riley. She had entered the cafeteria a few moments ago, and like always, the room went silent for a split second. Ivy, an alien diplomat from the Andromeda Galaxy, was not your average crew member. Her presence was unsettling to some, and not just because of her status. It was because of the way she looked. Her species, the Oxari, had features that most humans found unfamiliar and, to some, unsettling. She had smooth, gray skin that shimmered like polished stone, with eyes that were deep pools of silver, almost reflecting the light in strange ways. Her face was narrow, her jaw angular, and her lips were thin, giving her an expression that some might call cold. Some of the crew members had openly discussed how ugly she was. They whispered in hushed tones whenever Ivy walked by, as if she couldn't hear them. But Jake noticed. He always noticed. He had heard the comments more times than he cared to count. "She's so weird-looking," someone had muttered once. "How could someone like her be a diplomat?" Another voice had sneered. "She must be an alien spy or something. Look at those eyes, like she's always watching you." Jake's brow furrowed as he thought about the way people treated Ivy. It was frustrating to him, though he had never said anything aloud. He had been raised to see beauty in the things that others overlooked. He had spent most of his life among different cultures, and he knew that appearance didn't define a person's worth. Yet, for some reason, it bothered him more than he thought it would that Ivy was treated as less than she deserved. Jake was used to the occasional rude comment from some of the crew. He had seen plenty of prejudice over the years, especially when dealing with alien species. But this felt different. The way Ivy was treated felt like more than just prejudice. It was cruelty disguised as casual gossip. The worst part was that Ivy seemed to know it. She kept her distance from everyone. Jake had seen her sitting alone more times than he could count, her silver eyes scanning a datapad as she pretended to focus on the task at hand. She rarely engaged with the crew. When someone tried to speak to her, her responses were short and guarded, as if she were trying to shield herself from the weight of their disapproval. Jake leaned back in his chair and sighed. He had spent most of his life flying solo, but this felt different. There was something about Ivy. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was a quiet sadness in her that he couldn't ignore. He had seen the way her shoulders hunched when she walked into a room, as though preparing for the sting of cruel words. He had seen the way she flinched when a crew member made an offhand comment about her appearance. "Another day of being invisible, I guess," Jake muttered under his breath. He was half laughing at himself. Who was he to think he could change anything? He had his own problems to deal with. His assignment aboard the Endeavor was a temporary one, and once it was over, he would be back on Earth. A few more months, and he could forget about this cold, lonely station in the middle of nowhere. But something about Ivy made him feel different. It wasn't just her unusual looks, though that certainly caught his attention. It was her intelligence, the way she carried herself. She was sharp, perceptive, and capable in a way that made her stand out, despite the way the crew treated her. She had the kind of mind that didn't rest on trivialities. She could engage in conversations that lasted hours, discussing complex interstellar treaties and ancient civilizations with the kind of passion that could make anyone listen. Jake shifted in his seat, his gaze lingering on Ivy as she took a seat in the far corner of the room. She was alone, as usual. No one dared approach her. A part of Jake wanted to go over to say something to her, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was because he wasn't sure what he could say to make a difference. What could a few kind words do to change a lifetime of judgment? But the more Jake watched her, the more he felt the need to do something. He wasn't sure what that something was yet, but he knew he couldn't keep sitting by and pretending everything was fine. Ivy suddenly looked up from her datapad, her silver eyes meeting his for a brief moment. For just a second, Jake thought he saw a flicker of something in her gaze, a flicker of recognition, maybe even curiosity, but it was gone before he could be sure. She turned her attention back to the screen in front of her and continued reading, the moment slipping away like water through his fingers. Jake's heart raced a little faster. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like something had shifted in that small moment. He couldn't explain it, but he felt like maybe, just maybe, this was his chance. His chance to make a difference. His chance to show Ivy that not everyone saw her as just another alien, another creature to fear or mock. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The noise made some of the crew look up, but Jake didn't pay attention to them. He walked toward Ivy with purpose, his feet steady and firm as he approached the corner of the room where she sat. He had no plan, no idea what he was going to say, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, he felt sure of something. When he reached her table, Ivy didn't look up. She seemed lost in her datapad, so Jake cleared his throat to get her attention. It was a small sound, but it worked. Ivy slowly looked up, her gaze cautious, as though she expected him to say something rude or ask her to leave. Jake took a deep breath and offered a small smile. "Hey, Ivy," he said softly. "Mind if I sit here?" For a moment, Ivy didn't answer. She merely stared at him, her silver eyes unreadable. Then, with a small nod, she gestured toward the empty chair across from her. Jake sat down, his hands slightly trembling. He felt the weight of the moment, but he didn't let it show. He couldn't help but feel like this was a turning point, something that could change everything. But what would he say? The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Ivy didn't speak either. She simply waited, and Jake realized that maybe that was all she had ever wanted, someone to just sit with her and acknowledge her presence without judgment. He decided to speak, hoping his words would come out right. "I know things aren't always easy around here. But I just wanted to say that I don't care what others think. I see you for who you really are, Ivy. You're a lot more than they give you credit for." Ivy's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't respond immediately. For a long moment, Jake wondered if he had said the wrong thing. But then something happened. Ivy's gaze softened, and her shoulders, which had been tense, seemed to relax a little. She took a deep breath, as though she had been holding something in for a long time. "Thank you, Jake," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake smiled. For the first time, he felt like he had made a real connection. It was a small step, but it was a step toward something bigger, something that mattered. And in that moment, Jake knew he had made the right choice by speaking up. He had shown Ivy that she was more than her appearance. She was someone who deserved respect, just like anyone else. But little did Jake know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives forever. The next few days aboard the Endeavor felt different for Jake. He couldn't explain it at first, but something in the air had shifted. He wasn't sure if it was just the aftermath of his conversation with Ivy, or if the entire mission was starting to feel more personal. But every time he saw her, he felt a sense of hope he hadn't known before. It was like he had taken the first step toward something important, something real. It had been a week since he sat with Ivy in the cafeteria, and in that time the two of them had started talking more often. It wasn't anything big at first, small talk about the mission, about the research they were doing. But slowly their conversations began to grow deeper. Jake found that Ivy had a sharp mind, one that was capable of incredible insight into alien cultures, star systems, and interstellar politics. She had spent most of her life negotiating peace treaties, solving problems no one else could, and studying ancient civilizations that were long forgotten. And yet, despite all of her accomplishments, there was always an air of sadness around her. Jake had learned that Ivy came from a place where beauty wasn't determined by external features. In her homeworld, the Oxari appearance didn't matter as much as intellect, strength, and the ability to contribute to society. But Ivy wasn't like most of her people. Her species valued symmetry and a certain form of elegance in their physical traits, something that Ivy lacked in the eyes of many. And so, she had spent much of her life feeling like an outsider, caught between two worlds, both of which judged her for her looks. She had been raised to believe that she wasn't enough, that she wasn't good enough. That thought had stuck with Jake. He couldn't understand how someone so brilliant, so capable, could feel like they were somehow broken. Ivy wasn't just an alien diplomat. She was someone with immense value, someone who could change the course of history if given the right platform. Yet here she was, fighting to prove herself to a group of humans who didn't understand her. And the crew of the Endeavor, most of them, weren't making it any easier. One evening, while Jake was working on a diagnostics panel in the engine room, he overheard a conversation between two crew members. They were discussing Ivy, of course, and their words cut through the air like a knife. "Can you believe it?" one of them said. "She thinks she can just walk in here and demand respect. Doesn't she know how ugly she is, how out of place she looks? There's no way she's ever going to fit in here." The other crew member chuckled. "Yeah, she's like a walking nightmare. I don't get how she even made it to the position she's in. It's not like she has the look of someone in charge." Jake felt his blood boil at the words, but he kept his head down, pretending to focus on the work in front of him. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment he wanted to turn around, confront them, and tell them exactly what he thought. But he didn't. He couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he finished his task quickly and walked out of the engine room, his thoughts racing. The voices of the crew members echoed in his mind, and he couldn't shake them. Why did it matter so much? Why did they have to tear someone down like that just because they didn't fit into their narrow view of what was normal? It made no sense to Jake. But it made perfect sense to Ivy. She had been living in that reality her whole life, always surrounded by people who judged her based on her appearance. It didn't matter that she had saved entire civilizations from destruction or brokered peace agreements between hostile species. In the eyes of many, she was still ugly, and that was enough to make them dismiss her entirely. Jake knew that he couldn't change the minds of the entire crew, at least not overnight. But what he could do was help Ivy. He could show her that not everyone saw her the way they did. He could remind her that she was worth more than just the sum of her physical features. The next day, Jake found himself walking toward the communications room where Ivy was working. He had spent the night thinking about what he wanted to say to her. He didn't want to come across as overbearing or pitying, but he knew that something had to be said. She deserved to hear the truth, that she was more than what the crew thought of her. When Jake entered the room, Ivy was sitting at a console, her long fingers moving swiftly across the keys. She didn't look up when he walked in, but Jake didn't mind. He waited for her to finish, giving her space as she worked. It was a habit of his to respect other people's time and space. It wasn't easy for Ivy, he could tell. Her work was her escape, a place where she didn't have to think about how people saw her. Finally, Ivy looked up. Her silver eyes met Jake's, and for a moment the air seemed to hum with an unspoken understanding. She tilted her head slightly, as if questioning his presence. "Jake," she said softly, her voice as calm as always, though there was a hint of curiosity in her tone. "What brings you here?" I wanted to talk," Jake said, his voice quiet at first. "About what happened the other day, when we spoke in the cafeteria." Ivy's expression didn't change, but Jake could see the slight tightening of her jaw, a sign that she was bracing herself for what was to come. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice almost defensive. No, Jake quickly reassured her. I know that things haven't been easy for you here. I know how the crew talks, how they look at you." He paused, trying to choose his words carefully. "And I just wanted you to know that I see you. I see who you really are. Not just your appearance, not just the things people say. I see your intelligence, your strength. You've done more for this mission than anyone could have expected." Ivy blinked, clearly surprised by his words. For a moment there was silence between them. Then she slowly shook her head, her silver eyes lowering to the console in front of her. "You don't understand," she whispered, almost as if speaking to herself. "You don't know what it's like to be constantly looked down upon because of something you can't control. You don't know how it feels to always be the one who's different, the one who doesn't belong." Jake stepped closer, his heart aching for her. "I can't say I know exactly how it feels," he admitted. "But I know that what you've done here, what you've accomplished, is worth far more than anyone's opinion of you. You deserve respect. You deserve recognition." Ivy looked up at him, her gaze softening, though there was still a layer of sadness behind her eyes. "But they don't see me that way," she said quietly. "They'll never see me as anything other than what they think I am." Jake shook his head, his voice firm. "That's not true. Not everyone thinks that. Some of us see you for who you truly are, and I just wanted you to know that." For a long moment, Ivy didn't say anything. She simply stared at Jake, her expression unreadable. But then, slowly, a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Jake could see that his words had touched her, even if just a little. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't hear that enough." Jake smiled back at her, feeling a weight lift from his chest. "You should hear it more," he said, "and I'm happy to remind you whenever you need it." As Ivy turned back to her console, the room felt lighter somehow, as though the invisible wall between them had been chipped away just a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for Jake, that was enough. He knew that their journey had only just begun. But in that moment, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Ivy would begin to believe in herself the way he did. And he was going to help her get there, no matter what it took. The days passed quickly after that conversation, and with each passing moment, Jake could feel a subtle change in Ivy. It was small at first, just the way she held herself when she walked into a room, or the way she started making eye contact with the crew more often. But it was progress. Every time they spoke, Jake could see that she was beginning to believe in herself a little more. There was a quiet strength growing in her, something he hadn't noticed before, and it made him feel more hopeful than he had in weeks. But things weren't perfect, and Jake knew that. Ivy had spent her entire life being treated as if she didn't matter, so it wasn't easy for her to simply flip a switch and start seeing herself as someone worthy of respect. He understood that. Change took time. It wasn't long before they were faced with a mission that would test both their abilities and their bond. The Endeavor had been assigned to a delicate task, to mediate a dispute between two warring factions in a nearby system. The two factions, one human and one alien, had been on the brink of war for years, and now the time had come for someone to step in and prevent an all-out conflict. That someone was supposed to be Ivy. Ivy had been chosen for her skills as a negotiator, her ability to read people, and her deep understanding of different cultures. But Jake knew the pressure was starting to weigh on her. The closer they got to the conflict zone, the more withdrawn Ivy became. She spent hours in her quarters, preparing for the upcoming talks, reviewing endless data on both factions, trying to anticipate every possible outcome. Jake watched from afar, noticing how much she was pushing herself. One evening, as the ship cruised through the void of space toward the meeting location, Jake decided to visit Ivy in her quarters. He had learned that she often stayed up late, going over the details of her negotiations until her eyes were red from exhaustion. He knocked on her door, and after a moment she opened it, her expression tired but still warm. "Jake," Ivy said, her voice a little hoarse, "what brings you here?" "I thought you could use a break," Jake said with a small smile. "You've been working non-stop for days. You're going to burn yourself out if you're not careful." Ivy hesitated for a moment, as if she were about to protest, but then she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Jake could tell she was exhausted, but there was something else in her eyes, something that looked like doubt. "I don't know if I can do this," Ivy admitted as they both sat down at the small table in her quarters. "I've been trying to prepare for everything, but every time I think I have it all figured out, something new comes up. I don't know what to expect from either side." "What if I fail? What if I can't bring them together?" Jake looked at her for a long moment, his heart aching for her. He had seen this side of Ivy before, the part of her that doubted her own worth, the part that feared failure more than anything else. It wasn't easy to watch. "You won't fail," Jake said quietly. "You're more prepared for this than anyone else could be. I've seen how hard you've worked. You're not alone in this, Ivy. You have me and the rest of the crew supporting you." Ivy looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "I know," she said softly, "but it's hard. People like me don't get the kind of respect I need to do this job. I'm an alien, I'm not like them, and no matter how hard I try to show them that I'm capable, they just see me as different." Jake could hear the pain in her voice, and it hurt him. He wanted to do more for her than just offer words of encouragement. But he knew that actions spoke louder than words, and right now, all he could do was be there for her, to remind her that she wasn't alone. "Maybe," Jake said after a moment, "but that's exactly why you're the best person for the job. You're different, and that's a strength, not a weakness. You see things other people don't. You understand both sides better than anyone else ever could. You've got the skills, Ivy. I believe in you." Ivy lifted her eyes to meet his, her silver gaze filled with uncertainty. "Do you really believe that?" Jake smiled and nodded. "I do. I've seen it in everything you do. The way you think, the way you approach problems, it's something special. You don't need to be like everyone else. You just need to be yourself." For a moment, there was silence between them. Ivy seemed to be processing his words, and Jake could only hope that they were getting through to her. He wasn't sure if she believed him fully, but he knew that she needed to hear it. She needed to hear that she was enough, that she was capable, and that she had people who trusted her. Finally, Ivy let out a long breath and leaned back in her chair. "Thank you, Jake," she said, her voice soft but sincere. I don't know what I'd do without you. Jake's heart swelled, but he kept his expression casual. You'll never have to find out, he said with a wink. I'm not going anywhere. They shared a brief moment of quiet companionship before Ivy stood up and began pacing the room, her thoughts clearly drifting back to the mission. Jake stayed seated, watching her as she walked back and forth, lost in thought. He could see the wheels turning in her mind as she prepared herself for the difficult conversations ahead. You know, Ivy said suddenly, her voice thoughtful, I used to think that if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself enough, people would stop seeing me as just an alien. I thought that if I showed them I was just as capable as anyone else, they would treat me with the same respect. Jake nodded. And did it work? Ivy shook her head slowly. No, the more I try to prove myself, the more they just see me as different. As other, it's like I'm stuck in this cycle, trying to fit into a world that doesn't want to accept me. Jake leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. That's because you're trying to fit into their world, Ivy. You're not supposed to fit into their mold. You're meant to break it, to show them that there's more than one way to see things. You don't need their approval to be great. You just need to believe in yourself. Ivy stopped pacing and turned to face him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to figure out if he truly believed what he was saying. After a moment, she spoke. I've spent my whole life trying to fit in, she said quietly, trying to be what others want me to be. But maybe you're right. Maybe it's time for me to stop trying to fit in and start being who I really am. Jake smiled, feeling a sense of pride swelling in his chest. He could see it now, the first real spark of confidence in Ivy's eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I think that's the first step, he said, and I'll be here every step of the way. Ivy nodded, her gaze steady. Thank you, Jake. I think I needed to hear that. You don't have to thank me, Jake said, standing up. You've got this, Ivy. I know you do. As he left her quarters, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for the first time in a long while. Ivy wasn't just an alien diplomat anymore. She was someone with the power to change the world, someone who had the strength to face whatever came her way. And Jake was going to make sure she knew that every step of the way. The next few days were filled with tension as the mission to mediate the dispute began. The factions they were negotiating with were distrustful of one another, and the stakes were higher than ever. But Jake could see that Ivy was handling it better than anyone could have expected. She was focused, calm, and determined even when things got difficult. She was starting to believe in herself, and that made all the difference. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt. But Jake knew that Ivy was getting stronger every day, and he was proud of the progress she had made. And as they prepared for the final stages of the negotiation, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Ivy was ready, and so was he. The tension on the Endeavor had reached a boiling point. The mission to mediate between the two warring factions was no longer just a diplomatic negotiation. It was becoming a matter of survival for both sides. The human faction was growing impatient, frustrated by the lack of progress, and the alien faction was becoming more distrustful, unwilling to make any compromises. If Ivy didn't succeed, it could mean the collapse of peace between their two species. Jake could see it in Ivy's face. The weight of the task ahead was crushing her, but she wasn't showing it. On the outside, she was calm, collected, and as professional as always, but Jake knew her better now. He could see the signs, the way her eyes grew darker with fatigue, the way she didn't smile as much, the way she spent long hours in her quarters, going over the same data again and again. One night, Jake found her in the observation deck, staring out into the vastness of space. She was alone, as usual, her silver eyes fixed on the stars. There was something about the way she looked at the universe, like she was trying to make sense of something that was too big to understand. Jake stood there for a moment, watching her, unsure if he should interrupt her thoughts. But something told him that this time he couldn't just let her be. She needed someone to talk to. Hey, Jake said softly, stepping forward into her line of sight. Ivy turned her head slowly, her face weary but calm. She didn't say anything at first, just gave him a small nod. Can we talk? Jake asked, walking closer to where she stood. Ivy hesitated but then gestured to the space next to her. Sure, she said quietly. It's not like I'm going anywhere. Jake smiled faintly, but his concern for her was still evident. He sat down beside her, looking out at the stars with her. The silence stretched between them for a few moments before Ivy spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. I don't know what to do anymore, Jake, she said, her voice barely audible against the hum of the ship's systems. The factions won't listen to me. No matter what I say, they just keep fighting. It's like I'm invisible to them, like I don't matter." Jake turned to look at her, his expression serious. He could feel the depth of her frustration. "You matter, Ivy," he said firmly. "You matter more than you think, and you've done everything you can to bring them together, but you can't control everything." "There's only so much you can do," Ivy sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I've tried everything, every negotiation tactic I know, every strategy I've used before, but it's never enough. They're too entrenched in their own beliefs, their own hatred. And I don't know how to change that." Jake thought for a moment, trying to find the right words to ease her pain. He knew this wasn't just about the mission anymore. This was about Ivy's own sense of worth. The pressure of constantly fighting for approval, of constantly trying to prove herself, was wearing her down. "You're not alone in this," Jake said, his voice gentle. "You don't have to do it all by yourself. The crew is behind you. I'm behind you. We all believe in you, Ivy." Ivy looked at him, her silver eyes full of doubt. "Do you really believe that I can make a difference?" Jake nodded. "I do. I've seen what you're capable of. You're the reason we're even in this position. If anyone can bring these factions together, it's you." There was a long pause, and Ivy turned her gaze back to the stars. Jake could tell that her mind was racing, still processing everything he had said. She wasn't sure if she believed him, but she didn't push him away. She didn't dismiss his words. "Why do you care so much?" Ivy asked suddenly, her voice quieter now, as though she were trying to understand why Jake was so invested in her success. "You don't have to. You've got your own career, your own future. Why do you care about mine?" Jake's heart skipped a beat at her question. He hadn't expected her to ask that, but he knew the answer, even if it was hard to say aloud. He didn't want to admit it, not yet, but maybe this was the moment to do it. "I care because I see you for who you really are," Jake said, his voice steady but soft. "I see the strength in you, Ivy, the strength you don't see in yourself. You're more than just a diplomat, you're a leader, and you deserve to be seen for everything you are." Ivy's eyes searched his face, as though looking for something he wasn't saying. But then she looked away, a small, almost imperceptible smile crossing her lips. "I'm not a leader," she murmured. "I've never been a leader. I'm just someone trying to fix a problem I don't understand." Jake reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know you've had to fight your whole life for respect, for recognition, but you don't have to fight this battle alone. We're in this together." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy with meaning. For a moment, Ivy didn't say anything. She just stood there, her back to the stars, her thoughts seemingly lost in the distance. But Jake could see a shift in her. There was something different in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. "I've always felt like an outsider," Ivy said after a while, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like no matter how hard I tried, I would never truly fit in. That I would always be the one who didn't belong. But," she paused, her voice trembling slightly, "but maybe I'm starting to realize that it doesn't matter if I fit in. Maybe it's enough just to be who I am." Jake felt his chest tighten at her words. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond. But in that moment, he realized that Ivy was starting to accept herself. It wasn't a perfect transformation, but it was a start. She was beginning to see that her value wasn't tied to other people's opinions of her. It was tied to who she was inside. "You don't need to change for anyone," Jake said softly. "You're enough just as you are." Ivy looked at him again, and this time there was a flicker of something in her eyes, hope maybe. For the first time, it seemed like she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to prove herself to anyone. She was enough. The next morning, when the negotiations resumed, Ivy stood at the center of the room with a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't trying to please anyone anymore. She wasn't trying to change herself to fit into their expectations. She was there to do her job, to be the leader they needed her to be, and she would do it on her own terms. The human and alien representatives entered the room, their faces still tense, their mistrust palpable. But this time, Ivy didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She stood tall, her silver eyes sharp and focused as she addressed the room. "We're not here to fight," Ivy said, her voice clear and confident. "We're here to find a way forward, to build a future where both sides can coexist. If you're willing to listen, I'm willing to work with you. But I won't waste my time on games. This is the last chance for peace. Take it or leave it." Her words were strong, unyielding. And for the first time in a long time, Ivy felt a sense of control over the situation. She wasn't begging for respect. She wasn't trying to make herself fit into their narrow views. She was simply being herself. The room fell silent, the weight of Ivy's words hanging in the air. The representatives exchanged glances, their faces still skeptical, but something had changed. Ivy could see it in their eyes. They were listening. They were finally starting to see her for who she truly was, and for Ivy, that was the first step toward winning the peace. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. She just needed to be herself, and that in itself was enough. As the negotiations continued, Jake watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride. He had known Ivy had it in her all along. She just needed to believe it herself, and now she did. She was labeled ugly her whole life. My words stopped her cold.